Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and today we will be discussing Lucifer, known as the bringer of light, and also branded as the devil by the Christian Church. Where did this story come from, and how did it become associated with the devil? We are going to go deep. Unsurprisingly, there are stories from around the world with very similar themes. The most famous, perhaps at least here in the Western world, is Prometheus. But there's also even older stories, such as Enki, such as Loki, such as many others that have very similar undertones, currents, themes, trajectories. Nothing new. We all know. If you're new here, maybe you don't, but I'm sure you know. No folktale is standalone. Folktales, stories, legends, scriptures all often mimic each other from around the world. No surprise. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Now is your time. Make yourself a cup of tea, make yourself a cup of coffee. We're going to sit down, we're going to get into it. I'm actually drinking some coffee right now. Let's pep up, everyone. Mm-hmm. Ah, damn good coffee. Let's get in to the nitty gritty. I'm so excited. We're also going to be touching on Gnosticism. We're also going to be touching on theosophy. We're really going to go in there. We are going to get in there as we try to do here. Let's hop right in. So, Lucifer, the name Lucifer, directly translates to light bringer or morning star. It comes from the Latin lux, meaning light, and fer, which means to carry. Maybe it's fere, the way it's spelled. Fere. Okay, so it's bringer of light. So originally, Lucifer was not considered a demon at all. Just to be clear, this is like a later branding. Lucifer first appeared in Jerome's Latin Vulgate, a translation of Isaiah 14:12. The verse refers to a Babylonian king compared to Helel ben Shachar, a Canaanite deity representing the morning star, Venus, who rose too high and fell. Hmm. It's giving Icarus. So later, the Christian tradition fused this story of Helel with Satan and the serpent of Eden and the fallen angels of the book of Enoch into one rebel figure known as Lucifer. Curious. Curious. No, seriously, this is such an interesting and important thing to recognize that I think is a very common theme in the modern colonized world. This idea of creating characters that are bad influences, demonic, of the devil, but they're actually an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas. And it kind of reminds me of the princes of hell. Ooh, I should do an episode on that. But the princes of hell, there's like seven main ones, but the princes of hell are actually from older religions. And some of them are actually amalgamations of multiple deities. And then they became associated with the princes of hell to basically brainwash people to convert to Christianity. So they are demonizing other people's gods to then have them convert. And this is giving that. This is giving that. I also want to point out that the story of this Babylonian king, Helel ben Shahar, Helel, like in English, sounds like hell, right? And I don't think this is a coincidence, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so I think common things that are associated with Lucifer, I think even if you're not necessarily Christian or necessarily religious, I think things that have kind of been floating in the zeitgeist about Lucifer are themes of rebellion, but also themes of tyranny, hidden knowledge, pride, but also enlightenment, and awakening. And this is like a really interesting, this is a really, really interesting dichotomy here. And I think this is another thing that I want you to think about as we're learning about Lucifer. It is fascinating to me that a being who is seeking awakening and seeking to share knowledge is also vilified and demonized. And it does remind me, the fact that they tied Lucifer in with the serpent from the book of Genesis, I find fascinating. And I have touched on this in my serpent episode, but I want to touch on it again because in the book Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda is talking to his guru, who is like a Hindu Swami, and he is interpreting the Bible, and he talks about how the Bible is just rebranded Hinduism, which we love. But he talked about that in any story, in any folk tale, if there is an animal, it is always the voice of God. An animal is always an ally, and the animals are always speaking the truth of the gods. Even if there's a trick, even if there's some kind of deception, it's always to teach you a lesson, and they're always coming on behalf of the gods. And so the Swami, his name is Sri Yuktaswar, has the most fascinating interpretation of Genesis and how it was misunderstood eventually by Christians. And he talks about the serpent being a representation of nature and nature calling you to seek wisdom, and this voice in the sky being a personification of one's ego. Fascinating stuff. But anyway, getting back into it, Lucifer, like I mentioned, is most likely considered to be a modernized version of this king of Babylon known as Hillel bin Shahar. And this was in the Canaanite civilization. They believed that the morning star, which is Venus, was trying to ascend to the throne of the high, and it failed. So it basically is this idea of excessive ambition bringing demise. But it's also this symbol of rebellion, not only here on earth but also in the heavens. And this is the story that really became Lucifer's story. And of course, Lucifer's story is about this archangel who is cast from heaven from time trying to take God's place, allegedly. Interestingly, in early Christian practice, they did not associate Lucifer with Satan. As we all know, the Vatican usually is the one who's doing all these hateful decisions. Originally, church fathers gradually merged the idea of the fallen morning star, the serpent from Genesis, rebellious angels, and Satan, like I mentioned. So by the time it was in medieval times, Lucifer was Satan, the serpent was Satan, all rebellion was associated with Satan. And this is very effective mind control. And also important to remember. I think it's important to remember that no matter what you believe, and if you subscribe to a specific religion, it is important to read your scriptures and to think about them and think about different interpretations. One thing that I find disappointing is people often seem to latch onto one interpretation, and it seems silly to me, especially if the interpretation originated in medieval Europe. I don't think we should be doing anything that was popular or widely believed in medieval Europe. If medieval Europeans believed Lucifer was Satan and the serpent was Satan, by default we should assume they're wrong. Right? I know I'm right. You know I'm right. So, before all of this rebranding, Lucifer was considered the bringer of light. He was the illuminator, the teacher of the forbidden arts, and the one who frees humanity from their ignorance. He decides to leave heaven to teach light to humanity. So, let's get into the meat. I'm going to read a little bit of the story. This is a summary, a summary from both passages from Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, Revelation 12, and some early Christian interpretations. So we're just gonna tell the little story. Like I said, this is not there. I'm gonna have some direct quotes from the Bible, but I'm also gonna just be telling the story. Okay? I'm prefacing that. Okay? In the quiet before dawn, when Venus hangs low and brilliant over the horizon, the ancients saw a star that rose boldly into the sky, only to fall swiftly back toward the earth. They called it Helel ben Shahar, the shining one, son of the dawn. The prophet Isaiah used this image as a metaphor for a tyrannical Babylonian king who dared to exalt himself beyond his station. He wrote, quote, "How you have fallen from heaven, Hillel, son of the dawn. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, the depths of the pit." So, in this original context, it is not a demon that is Lucifer or Hillel, and it's not the devil. It is a human king who tried to ascend. I also think this is fascinating. This does feel very Anunnaki coded, and we're actually going to get into this because there are a lot of parallels with the story of Lucifer with Enki, who is one of the Anunnaki pantheon. But according to the Mesopotamian and Sumerian history, the Anunnaki, the gods who came from the sky, or some believe as the aliens who came from the sky, appointed some of their own as kings and queens. Some of them would be half human, half Anunnaki, or some of them would be whatever, three quarters Anunnaki, and they would appoint their own as kings and queens. So this kind of does feel as if this human king, quote unquote, or this king appointed by the Anunnaki, perhaps tried to rival Anu. And the reason why I feel like this is Anunnaki coded is there are so many stories from the Mesopotamian and Sumerian traditions of people or kings or higher ups disagreeing with the rulership of the Anunnaki and being punished. And so those stories seem to be repeated throughout time. Um, this idea of like not questioning the authority of God, who is a male, a man, an authoritarian man. Like, please, please. I would be so for not questioning God if God was Mother Earth and nature. Like, yeah, don't question her. I'm for that. But if God is an authoritarian man who lives in the sky, fuck off. Go literally go suck a dick. Okay. So, early on, both Jewish and Christian faith began to hear new echoes of this story. So instead of hearing about Hillel, it started morphing into the story of a proud heavenly being, brilliant as the morning star, who rose into rebellion. So this is a distinct change from the original story, who Isaiah mentioned as a human king who tried to ascend into the heavens or ascend somehow into the most high, he says. Now this is turning into a story of already a heavenly being that is trying to ascend and rebel. In the book of Ezekiel, there is a poetic lament for another king, a king known as Tyr or Tyre. It is he is described as a guardian cherub in Eden. Quote, "You are the seal of perfection. You were on the holy mountain of God, till wickedness was found in you, and I expelled you, guardian cherub." End quote. That is so fascinating. This too originally refers to a human ruler, but its heavenly symbolism as a cherub soon merged with Isaiah's fallen morning star. This is so fascinating. A final thread comes from the book of Revelation, which tells of a cosmic battle. Quote, a great dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, was hurled down to earth, and his angels with him. This is from Revelation. I also think this particular quote here, this great dragon, the ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, was hurled down to earth and his angels with him. This has a lot of parallels to the story of the jinn. Highly recommend listening to my jinn episode, but there is a very similar creation story of the jinn, and that the jinn came from this ancient order of spiritual beings that basically had a schism, and a group of them were cast away and basically be kind of like lived in their own reality, and they can move between realities, which is why humans can sometimes see them or have experiences with them, but they basically were like demoted realities. They started in a higher reality and then descended. And there seems to be this seems to be a very similar story. And again, these are all slightly different. There's a story of the human king, the story of the heavenly body, and now the story of this schism of a dragon being hurled to earth with his angels. This is fascinating. This obviously laid the groundwork for what is now considered the fall of Satan, and then eventually compiling that with Lucifer and eventually being fused together. So now Lucifer is associated with the morning star who rose too high, a guardian cherub or an angel that was cast from the mountain of God, and a dragon or serpent defeated by Michael. Fascinating. The medieval imagination combined them into one figure, Lucifer, the light bearer who fell. But in the earliest sources, the story is sparse, symbol heavy, and ambiguous because, like I said, these passages I read are very ambiguous and like don't even refer to a specific person or Lucifer. It also doesn't really seem like it was the same person. I also want to point out how I just feel I've always felt skeptical of Lucifer being associated with the devil because why is his name Light Bearer? Like, what? You're telling me the bringer of light is associated with the devil? Like, you're full of shit. You're literally full of shit. Okay, so let's talk about Prometheus a little bit. Prometheus has very similar themes, and in my opinion, because specifically like talking about the Bible here, there's not really a lot of meat about Lucifer. It almost seems as if the church like ran and embellished a lot of details about Lucifer, and I have reason to believe that Prometheus kind of became the rhetoric, the syllabus of which they based Lucifer off of. I do also want to mention that Greece was one of the earlier countries to adopt Christianity and practice it very widely. In the ancient world, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Greece have some of the oldest churches and oldest scriptures. So it does make sense that Prometheus, which is a Greek myth, would maybe aid in the imagination and painting the picture of Lucifer. And to me, it's very clear that the lines blurred and they are blended. But before we get into that, let's take a quick break. Are you a fan of the podcast and want everyone to know? Well, guess what? We have merch live. There are sweatshirts, t-shirts, tank tops, water bottles, stickers, all kinds of things. There's also some other like random fun things of my personal art. But why not get a tote bag, a tumbler, and a hoodie to tell the world that you listen to the pod? Check it out. There's a link in the description of this video and a link in the description of my podcast and channel. Check me out, babe. All right, boo boo. Let's talk about Prometheus. So, I'm going to tell you a little story. Let's have a little story time. Let's discuss the myth of Prometheus. In the age before humans understood the rhythm of the seasons, and before humans even knew how to create a fire, When the gods and the Titans still contested the fate of the world, there lived a Titan called Prometheus, whose names whose name means forethought. He was cunning and wise, a friend of humankind, a trait rare among the immortals. This all came to a head at the Hesiod, or wait, fucking this up. This all came to a head at the Macone, or I'm gonna say Macone because I'm just assuming. I'm gonna say Macone. I feel like I know I'm pronouncing this wrong, but just bear with me. Macone. So at the Macone, a great feast that was held between gods and mortals. At this feast, the Titans would decide how sacrifices would be offered forever after. And Prometheus prepared two portions from an ox. One pile glistened and had fat wrapped around the bones. The other pile had the good meat hidden inside the ox's stomach. He offered Zeus the choice. Zeus chose the shining pile, and then realized too late that he had been tricked, and the best portion of the meat had got to the humans. In a fury, Zeus deprived the mortals of fire. But Prometheus would not allow humanity to freeze in darkness. He ascended to Olympus, stole a glowing ember from the forge of Hephaestus, and he hid it within a hollow fennel stalk, and carried fire back to earth. With fire came the dawn of human civilization, with cooking, tool making, metalworking, light, and civilization. Prometheus lifted humanity out of an age of ignorance, and Zeus saw this and was enraged. It was a direct threat to his authority. Prometheus was seized and bound in unbreakable chains, and he was fastened to a pillar. Every day, an eagle, which was Zeus's own bird, descended to tear out Prometheus's liver. Each night, the organ grew back, and each day the eagle would return and eat the liver once again. Thus, Prometheus suffered endlessly. Zeus also punished humanity by creating Pandora, the first woman crafted by the gods, bearing a jar that would release sorrow into the world. I'm sorry, this just feels so coded in sexism. But like I'm just listen to that. Like Zeus is mad that Prometheus brought humanity fire and that humanity got the better portion of meat. And so to punish Prometheus, he's basically being crucified. And then he releases Pandora, who is a woman and a bearer of sorrow. We all know about Pandora's box. Like, like come the fuck on. This does really feel Anunnaki coded. This does really feel like a colonizer in the sky hating humanity and controlling them with poverty and and also just throwing in a quick story of misogyny. Women, the bringers of sorrow. Like, please. In this story, the bringer of sorrow is Zeus. Zeus is a dick. He's the creator of sorrow with fucking poverty. Wow. It just really hits me sometimes. Like, misogyny is such an old program. This program is thousands of years old, and it's just been cooking away at our brains. Oh my God. Okay. So, another interesting story about Prometheus, this is kind of like another side quest story, is the story of As Asclepius. I think I'm saying that right. Asclepius. In this tragedy, Prometheus speaks from a rock itself, and he proclaims, I have saved humanity, though they knew not their own helplessness. He lists the arts that he had given mortals: numbers, writing, astronomy, navigation, medicine, metalwork, prophecy, the harnessing of animals, the building of ships. Every skill that humans have, he declares, comes from Prometheus. This sounds so much like Enki. Now, what I find so interesting about this story of Prometheus, it's clear that the Christian story of Lucifer is inspired by Prometheus. Because, as we discovered, there really isn't that many direct reference to Lucifer in the Bible. And there seems to be a lot of embellishment, and it does seem very Prometheus informed. What I also find so fascinating is being condemned for helping humanity. How is that demonic? What? Now, this is where it gets interesting because this has so many parallels to Enki. Enki is a member of the Anunnaki, who are the gods of the Mesopotamian religion. As I'm sure you've heard, many people believe them to be aliens. Perhaps aliens and gods are the same thing. Who knows? But according to the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians, they wrote detailed histories. And interestingly, in their language, they did not have a word for religion. And that is something that I think is commonly misunderstood in modern society and research of specifically the Mesopotamian and Sumerian cultures. They believed and they wrote that these gods came from the sky and created their civilizations, and that their kings and queens were directly related and descendants of these beings, right? So this is not a religion, these are their histories according to them, okay? So, who is Enki? Enki is one of the sons of Anu. Anu is like the head king of the Anunnaki. From what I understand, Anunnaki is it means those who descend from Anu. So Anu, who is the main king, is basically like the leader of this whole bloodline. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys have seen this video, it's like pretty viral, but there's this really interesting video I saw um of like a podcast in Brazil, and these bros were interviewing um native people from the Amazon, and they were asking them about aliens, and they were like, "Yeah, what's an alien?" Like they had never heard the word alien before. And then they showed them a picture of like an alien, like the classic gray alien with the big eyes. And the native people of the Amazon are like, "Yeah, those are Anunnaki." What? Crazy town. Crazy talk. Really interesting. And also, in the Hopi tradition, to the natives of North America, they also call the ant people Anu. Again, I'm not making this up. This is real life, you guys. If you don't believe me, you should do your own research. Actually, you should be doing your own research. I'm doing this to inspire you to do your own research. I don't have a research team. I'm one guy. I'm fascinated in this stuff. I think about it all the time. I'm informed by my own life experiences, my own crazy, freaky dreams I've had, and I'm just doing my own detective work. But like, you should be doing too. And sometimes I get these ideas because people write in. I actually do want to have an honorable mention. A listener emailed into the pod. I actually didn't get confirmation if I could share their name, but what's the first initial of their name? Let's call them K. K wrote in and requested this subject, which I'm so thrilled. I've been meaning to cover this for so long. And we're doing this together. I feel like if we all put our heads together, we can start uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world. They've been keeping secrets from us. They've burned books, they have burned libraries, they have rebranded things. And I no information can actually be destroyed because we have a hive mind. All consciousness is a hive mind, and we can tap into the internet, not the internet, the internet. Okay. Okay. So I'm totally getting off the rails right now. We're talking about the Anunnaki. Anu is the main king of the Anunnaki, allegedly the colonizer of worlds. According to the histories, they had colonized many planets. They came to Earth to mine for gold and other precious metals, mostly gold. Anu did not find interest in planet Earth because he sought higher levels of gold, but gave Earth to two of his sons almost as like a pet project, almost as like a gift, mostly because Earth was particularly beautiful and almost like a Goldilocks planet, if you will. Gorgeous, diversity, great weather, a very gorgeous and inhabitable planet. So, Anu had many children, but two of his like most famous children are known as Enlil and Enki. Enlil is his legitimate son. So, Anu had Enlil with his sister, which makes him of royal descent, and so Enlil was given planet Earth. Whereas Enki was kind of like the not the main king, but as he was an illegitimate son, I mean, as the story often goes, was much more ambitious and more educated. Um, so he was known to be able to do biological experiments to create a new creature and have someone incarnate into it. Um, Basically, like a scientist, an alchemist, a builder of many things, an architect, not only of physical things, but of flesh. So some people believe, like in the Bible, the story of God making humans out of clay, like is actually Enki bioengineering humans, whereas Enlil would be like the authoritarian God who is telling people what to do. So as they are brothers, they feud a lot. And basically the dynamic is that Enlil is kind of giving Jeffrey Lannister or Joffrey Lannister. It's giving like spoiled prince who knows nothing. And Enki became associated with caring about the people. In a way, he's the father of the people because he created them and therefore cared about their well-being, cared about their education, and as a mad scientist had a scientific interest in watching humanity grow and watching their brains expand, blah, 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 blah. So, according to some of the stories, Enlil and Enki would have many fights, and eventually Enki descended into the ocean to hide from his brother where he lived out his days. So some people believe like the stories of Poseidon are also based off of Enki. And interestingly, the Capricorn symbol, like the mermaid goat, is based off of Enki, allegedly. So Enki now is associated with water, with magic, alchemy, knowledge, and just craftsmanship in general, but also as a protector of humanity. He's known as a rebel and a defier of the highest gods, aka Enlil, his brother. And he's known to repeatedly go against his brother's wishes to save humans. It is said that Enki warned Zeusudra of the Great Flood, which in the Bible, of course, is Noah. He gave forbidden knowledge to humans. He is considered rebellious, cunning, and deeply tied to wisdom. And this is what I find so fascinating. So, some people interpret the Bible that God is basically these two brothers. So, if like God is relinquishing punishment or genocide or like killing people, that would be Enlil because he's like a tyrannical king. Whereas Enki is the God that is doing merciful things like giving them light, telling them to eat from the apple of knowledge, warning them of the great flood and building an ark. So this is a really interesting hot take that like perhaps the Bible is an amalgamation of two alien brothers or gods who are always fighting with each other and have different interests for humanity. Fascinating. I could talk about the Anunnaki all day. I will say I have been meaning to do an episode on the Anunnaki. There's just so much to cover that I just don't like know how to structure it. I feel like it could be 20 hours long. I don't, do you want to hear that? A 20-hour, like that's crazy. Write in. Let me know if you are interested. Another fascinating parallel, though, that I do really want to mention is the story of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl is a Mesoamerican god known as the feathered serpent, and I feel like I have mentioned him quite a few times throughout the process of this podcast, but Quetzalcoatl is considered to be the giver of knowledge. And he is attributed with many things and many powers, but there is stories of Quetzalcoatl bringing corn or maize to humans. So that would make him the sustainer of civilization. He is associated with wind, with knowledge, calendars, and creation. He's also known to defy other gods to uplift humanity. He is symbolized as a serpent and associated with knowledge. The serpent parallels a lot of Lucifer's depictions as a serpent. I also want to mention too that it does kind of remind me of the Capricorn symbol, this like mermaid goat. You know, Quetzalcoatl is half serpent, half bird. It's there's parallels here. Interestingly, in some myths, there are stories of Quetzalcoatl being exiled, um, which, I mean, it's matching up. Another honorable mention is Odin. Odin is not considered a rebel against the gods, but against the boundaries of reality. He hung on the world tree for 9 days in the pursuit of runes, which was hidden knowledge. He also stole the mead of poetry from the giants, and he was considered a seeker of forbidden insight. Also, I want to bring up the Watchers and the fallen angels from the book of Enoch. A group of angels who descended to Earth and taught humans magic, astrology, metallurgy, cosmetics, healing, and warfare. Oh, as an I should mention the Book of Enoch is one of the deleted books of the Bible. The Book of Enoch is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is part of the ancient original canons of the Bible, and the Vatican eventually erased the Book of Enoch. So this is where these fallen angels or watchers are mentioned. So the watchers are considered to be a transgression because they revealed secrets not meant for humanity. Their leader, Azazel, who is considered one of the princes of hell, is one of the closest pre-Luciferian figures. Azazel taught forbidden knowledge, and he was punished by being bound eternally. It also kind of reminds me of the Prometheus story, right? Like being bound to a pillar. And this again, like this is so similar, being punished for sharing too much with humanity. Hmm. Another story that I found really interesting, and again, I'm just touching on some of these because there's just we could talk about this forever. If you know of your own stories, please write in. There's also a Slavic deity known as Satanel, which again like has Satan in the title. And this is a pre-Christianized figure who represented pride, rebellion, and heavenly war. Satanel was a cosmic rival with the highest god, and originally was a high-ranking angel who eventually fell. Literally, is that not the story of Prometheus slash Lucifer? There's also the story of Maui, who is a myth from the Polynesian islands, and I think a better way to say that is the islands of Samoa, right? I mean, a lot of us will say Polynesian, but technically it is a colonizer word. I mean, I'm gonna look it up. It's just kind of impossible. This is like what's so hard about English, and I think we need to think critically about this. Ugh, let's take a break. Hi, it's me, Annabelle, and if you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much. Please like and subscribe my channel, my page. I have so many kinds of content and I'm working on new kinds. You may be listening to me just through my podcast or through YouTube. You should check out my YouTube if you're not watching or listening to me there. I have meditation videos. I have yoga videos coming soon. I have my full length podcast. I'm doing short episodes. I'm doing shorts. And soon I'm going to be having listener episodes. So, like, subscribe. Thanks, babe. Love you. Okay, collecting my thoughts. I really could go on rants about colonization forever, but sometimes it feels impossible, but we can do it. But I do really think that as English speakers, we do need to think seriously about decolonizing our language because you can't fully decolonize your mind if your language is colonized. So, why am I saying that? Because even the word Polynesia is a made up word. The people of the Polynesian Islands, they're in their language and their tradition, Polynesia is not a fucking thing. So I'm trying to look up the ancient word. Hello. Hello. Okay. And that was my thinking song. Don't mind me. Don't mind me. So it seems like the area that is considered Polynesia is literally a giant triangle within the Pacific. And I didn't realize that it also considered, there's like so much territory. Oh my God. Okay. My Googling skills are slacking right now, so please forgive me. And if you know a better term to describe Polynesia, write in, babe. Let's fucking end this shit. Let's fucking end this shit. End it. Okay, but what we're talking about right now is Maui. Maui also, in the story of Maui, he stole fire from the underworld to give to humans. He was a challenger of gods who bends or breaks cosmic rules, brings culture and civilization to humanity. Again, Prometheus parallels. So, those were a lot of honorable mentions. Mostly, I really want to illustrate the point that there's many more stories with similar backbones, with similar trajectories, and again, humanity as a whole is a hive mind. And I think sometimes we get so trapped in like what's real, what's not real, like what really happened. And I think this is just my opinion, but I think a better way to look at art, to look at religion, to look at beliefs, to look at history is that everything is not as real as we think it is. And what I mean by that is that we are spiritual beings and physical beings, and there's a spectrum in between. So, regardless if things are like tangibly real physically, or if they are spiritually real, or just real in our own minds, they still hold a gravity. And if similar stories are being told around the world, whether they're actually like a real physical history or just an allegory for something deeper, something is coming to the surface subconsciously. These stories mean something. They really are about something deeper. And in my opinion, I'm not surprised that in a time of war, in a time where literally for thousands of years we have not been able to be peaceful, we are murdering each other, we are colonizing each other, we are enslaving each other, we are committing acts of sexual violence against children. There's so much horrific things happening on Earth, and I'm not surprised that a modern understanding of a light bringer is associated with demonic activities. Those seem to go hand in hand. Am I right? I know I'm right. Okay. So now I do really want to start talking about Gnosticism because this is kind of tying into like what I've been saying all along. it's so interesting to me that now, without a lot of thought, Lucifer is just associated with demonic activities and associated with Satan. Um, but Gnosticism has a completely different take. And Gnosticism became a very popular movement in the ancient world. The word Gnosticism comes from the word gnosis in Greek, which means knowledge. And this became almost like a Christian philosophy that for a long time remained secret because they wanted to avoid persecution from the Catholic Church. But their interpretation of the Bible is very different. And I do really want to get into that. So, Gnosticism started between the first and fourth century CE, which is around the time that Christianity started. The first Christian church was built in what, the year like the year 30 or something in Egypt. So the first between the first and fourth century CE is when Christianity like really started to take root. So Gnosticism is OG. I'm just throwing that out there. This is OG. The idea of Gnosticism is the search for hidden knowledge, which in Greek is gnosis. It is the exploration of dualism, the idea of spirit being good and matter being a trappings for flaws. It was the examination of divinity and salvation through awakening, not through obedience. This is critical. So, the key beliefs of Gnostic myths is that the true God is unknowable. It's an infinite source that is unnameable and intangible, which I would have to agree. A flawed lesser being known as the Demiurge was created and therefore and then eventually created the material world. They often consider this, they call this being Yaldabaoth. The Demiurge believes that he is God. However, he is ignorant, jealous, and authoritarian. Period. Humanity contains divine light stolen from the higher realms, and it is the duty of each individual to awaken their own inner light. And that is how one escapes the world of the demiurge, this tyrannical demigod. I'm not going to lie, I find this very compelling. In the Gnostic tradition, this reframes the Old Testament God not as the highest deity, but as an idea that ripples into a later Luciferian interpretation. So basically, according to the Gnostic belief, is that the God in the Bible is a false God. God in the Bible is a being who believes he is God and believes he is the highest being, but is in fact a tyrannical, flawed individual who is creating suffering and pain. And that the truest God is a much greater being that transcends time and space and transcends individuality. And I think they're kind of eating with this. This is compelling to me, babe. They're swaying me. I you know what? I have to like this is kind of bringing back memories because when I was in high school, I got really into mushrooms and I was smoking a bunch of weed. And I started skipping a lot of school and like just reading a bunch of fucking books. I would like go to bookstores and just like go through the metaphysics section. And I have no idea how I discovered Gnosticism, but I like read about it in some book and I like, yeah, I was just like, I would go to the cemetery and get super baked and like read about Gnosticism. And I swear none of it stuck, but I was like, I remember being like, yeah, like I'm putting all the pieces together, like I'm really getting it. Like I'm gonna like I was on a quest for knowledge, dude. I was on a quest for fire. Did you guys ever do that? Did you ever go through that phase in high school where you just skip school and go to the cemetery and get super baked and read about ancient religion? That's what I did with my life. And now I'm a fucking bro with a podcast. Who have I become? I wish we could time travel because I'd love to interview my high school self. I'm sure she would have so many fun hot takes. I wish I could get into her mind. All of those deep thoughts I was thinking are just gone. I was just so fucking baked, dude, but I know I was thinking deep things. Okay. So, according to Gnosticism, they believed that the serpent in the book of Genesis was a messenger of the true God that brought wisdom to humanity. Fascinating. It reminds me of Sri Yukteswar's hot take. Hmm. Also, eating from the tree of knowledge awakened Adam and Eve from their ignorance, which was a gift. And it was the Demiurge, this false god, that forbade this and wanted to keep humanity enslaved. So fascinating. Another thing I also want to mention is like how much I didn't know this really until I like went to India. So much of Indian culture, and again, even this term India is so broad because they never considered themselves India until they were colonized by the British. They were a bunch of smaller kingdoms. But let's just say India to keep this point succinct. So much of Indian culture had been erased, even just in the mere 100 years that the British were there. And so much of their culture was through oral tradition. But when I was traveling through India, it was so interesting to me that everyone was, it was like common knowledge there that all religion and all belief was just Hinduism that the rest of the world was copying and didn't understand it came from India. But what is fascinating is like we love to attribute Greeks as like the greatest thinkers in the world, the creators of math and the creators of philosophy, and they truly aren't. These ideas, advanced math, advanced philosophy, all of this was being practiced in Mesopotamia, Sumeria, India, hundreds, thousands of years before. And that's something I was like really charmed by as a foreigner, like just talking to people. And they would just be like, didn't you know? Like, oh, yes, like Christians are Hindu. I guess not everyone would say that about Christianity, but a lot of people, especially highly religious people, were always tying everything back to Hinduism. It's kind of like that in My Big Fat Greek Wedding when Tula's dad is like, say any word, and I will tell you that it's Greek. And like that's what I experienced when I was in India. So many people were just waiting for any spiritual belief and they would just tie it back to Hinduism. And honestly, like they sold me. Okay, so anyway, back to Gnosticism. They again are believing that Lucifer, this bringer of light, is really just a small allegory for this bigger idea that God itself is an intangible concept and that the demiurge, this false god, is like tricking people and trying to keep humanity enslaved. So the reason why they chose Gnosticism as the term for this philosophy, religion, is this idea that knowledge is liberation and that ignorance is the tool of the demiurge. They believe that knowledge would awaken the divine spark in humanity. And this really kind of ties into Luciferian philosophy. A key part of Lucifer is this idea of rebelling against the demiurge. Some Gnostic stories describe angelic beings resisting the demiurge to help humanity. Those rebellious messengers align with the Promethean and Luciferian archetype. And again, I just want to bring up like Gnosticism was created before Rome even sanctioned Christianity as its main religion. Like this is some OG belief. And I think it's like most people have never even heard of Gnosticism, unsurprisingly. This idea of a light bringer would be considered to be a savior, like duh. Although not named Lucifer, many Gnostic texts revere Sophia, who is considered to be a bringer of wisdom, also Christ as a liberator, a bringer of wisdom, a bringer of light, and also the other angelic bearers of light. And again, at this point, the term Lucifer didn't even exist. Lucifer was created in the Latin tradition And again, telling on themselves is considered the bringer of light. Like, hello. So I do really want to now touch on like the history of how the church started interpreting Lucifer, because as we all know, people were practicing Christianity long hundreds of years before Rome sanctified it, and then Rome started tweaking things, erasing books, changing the perception. They're PR geniuses, okay? That's one thing we can give them credit for. These bitches know how to do PR. So it wasn't until um around the 4th century CE, when that is when Jerome's Latin Vulgate described and retranslated that quote from Isaiah 4:12, and it changed morning star to Lucifer. And at this point it was not intended to be a name for Satan. This was still considered to be the planet Venus as a light bringer and its like quest to ascend higher, blah blah blah. So eventually in the 4th and 6th century, church fathers began linking Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. So this is the story of like the morning star trying to rise and that the fall of that cherub. Remember those like two texts I read earlier? Around this time between the 4th and 6th century is when they started compiling those as the same entity. And they connected them to that Revelation quote about the dragon that was cast from heaven with its fallen angels. And so that's when these stories that were once separate became to merge into one entity. This entity that was a proud angel, a rebellious angel who tried to take the seat of God and was cast out of heaven and became this dark entity, the story of Satan. And this was the first time that Lucifer became a name for Satan, which is now still taught to this day. And then, of course, the Middle Ages rolled around between the 6th and 13th century. And this is when, that fusion really became synonymous. Theologians fully equated Lucifer with Satan. There was books written such as the Vita Adam et Ave, the life of Adam and Eve. And in this story, they talk about how Satan refused to bow to Adam and Satan rebelled and the fall of the dark angels. And many artists and writers at this time were fascinated with Lucifer and even like, making sculptures of him, associating him with the devil and temptation and rebelling against God. And it's just so interesting, though, that it's like, yes, consuming knowledge is satanic. Like, it's so obvious. Like what? Why why would your God be against you consuming knowledge and your devil be pro knowledge? Like that doesn't make fucking sense, bro. Okay. And then, of course, Dante's Inferno comes out, right? This revolutionizes the Christian world. The Christians were rock hard when Dante's Inferno came out. That was between the 14th and 17th century. Dante's Inferno really became a major part of the zeitgeist. This depicts Lucifer as the great fallen angel in hell, right? And like this really hit home this vision. Now people are like seeing Lucifer in their mind as this like hot angel with a six pack who is Satan. And then, of course, eventually in Milton's Paradise Lost, this transforms Lucifer into the tragic and proud rebel. And these works really locked in the identity of Lucifer as the devil, right? And I think all of us, even those of us who weren't raised religious, like can see Lucifer as this like Grecian statue with a six pack and angel wings, who's like emo and like a hot bad boy, right? And this is like completely made up. This is like completely a fantasy that was created through literature and demo demonizing and vilifying older deities associated with bringing light to humanity. Let's take a break. Esoterica and Nonsense wants to hear from you. We have listener episodes coming, and I want to tell your story. Maybe you've had a really freaky dream. Maybe you had some crazy religious experience. Maybe you grew up in a cult. Maybe you actually just have some random stories that your grandma used to tell you growing up. Maybe you just want to share something random with me. The floodgates are open. Please email in your story at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. Any story that comes to your mind, I want to hear it, even if you just want to say hi. We love that. We are all for it. And get ready for some listener episodes coming soon. Goodness gracious me, oh my. So, as time goes on, now we're in the 19th and 20th century, theosophy becomes a very popular and underground subculture. Now, if you don't know, theosophy became a, in my opinion, like a child of the alchemical movement, which was popularized during the Renaissance. Theosophy kind of became a resurgence of Gnosticism and philosophical study on all theological things. It is said from the research I've done that the theosophy community is the community that eventually infiltrated the Freemasons because they needed a cover. Theosophy became illegal, and so they needed a way to practice without being discovered. And so they infiltrated the Freemasons as a way to have meetings in large groups that weren't associated with religion. Of course, as we all know, most likely the Freemasons are up to some weird shit. Uh, so they've gone kind of left, and I don't really know how much of like how true they are to being true Gnostics, but basically around this time in the 19th, 20th century, Blavatsky and occultists reinterpreted Lucifer as a misunderstood lightbringer, a Promethean figure, and a symbol of enlightenment. They started separating Lucifer from the medieval satanic identity, which again, I think is pretty obvious. But from what I understand, from the research I've done, the issue with the theosophy movement is that because it was being practiced underground and practiced by very powerful and well-connected people, they still preferred keeping regular people in ignorance so they could profit from them. So I have heard theories that the founding fathers of the United States were practicing theosophy, and it was illegal under the British Crown and under all Christian rule. And part of why they wanted to secede from Europe was so that they could practice theosophy. And then, allegedly, once they won their freedom, they decided it was still better to practice privately so they could keep regular people in ignorance and then they could profit from them privately. That's the theories I've heard. Who knows? I don't know. This is alleged. Don't come for me, Freemasons. Don't come for me, Illuminati. But of course, as most of us know, most mainstream and modern churches still fully believe that Lucifer is Satan and a fallen angel, a tyrant and a rebel of the God, which is not tolerated and in fact evil. Interestingly, though, it is important to note that some biblical scholars note that the ancient texts never originally refer to Satan, and that Lucifer also is a newer term. This all comes from a term morning star, which was allegedly the name of a king, a human king. Hmm. The devil entity evolved across centuries, and biblical scholars do admit this, okay? Like, this is just a reminder. Like, this started with the story of a king that does feel like it's being borrowed from these other myths that then snowballed into becoming a angel and then into being Satan. You know what I'm saying? So, I really do think that all of us, like, this is my dream for humanity. All of us should just be thinking about everything Like everything that you experience, like think about it. Like, where did this come from? Why is it that we associate pink with girls and blue with boys? I mean, that's a whole other tangent. I could get into that. But I'm just using this for an argument's sake. I want us to question more, not necessarily antagonize, but like, why do we believe these things, you know? And I think the Bible is just kind of like this endless treasure trove of like ideas and beliefs that are interpreted a certain way and then create mindsets for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years. And I do find that to be sociologically and anthropologically fascinating, but also kind of alarming because as someone who was raised in the United States, and I was not raised Christian, I am surprised how many Christian ideals were subliminally taught to me just by being raised in that society. Um, like, I think I went to church as a kid maybe 3 times, or maybe 5 times total, and I, like, didn't even pay attention, and why did I know, though, that Lucifer was Satan? You know what I mean? Like, it's so interesting to me that those things were seeping in even though my parents never talked about it, my school never talked about it, and yet, like, these things are just floating around and, like, other Christian ideals that I think are just ingrained into the culture of the United States, and I think it's really important for us to think about these things and to also do more research in the culture and the context of the ancient texts. Because as we all know, I'm going to die on this sword, but the Bible was not originally written in English, obviously. It wasn't originally written in Latin. The oldest scriptures of the Torah were written in Aramaic, and then the New Testament, there's multiple versions, but some of the oldest versions of the New Testament were written in a dialect of ancient Greek, Ethiopian, and Egyptian. Coptic Egyptian, I should say. And so, how much nuance are we missing from not being able to understand not only specific words, but the cultural context of certain words? How much nuance are we missing from not understanding certain customs? For example, one of my friends for a while joined a Christian cult and then eventually they kicked her out because she started doing too much research, but she became fascinated with the scriptures. And so she started researching about the culture in the Levant, the culture in the ancient world around the Mediterranean. And she was telling me a really interesting interpretation of turning the other cheek. I there is like a part of the Bible where Jesus is giving a sermon and he's talking about if somebody slaps you across the face that you turn the other cheek, right? I think a lot of us like heard that growing up. And growing up, when we heard it, it was kind of taught to us that turning the other cheek means like don't engage in violence. So like let them hit you again because violence is bad. That's kind of the interpretation. But my friend was telling me that the interpretation is slightly different than just not engaging in violence. The reason why you turn the other cheek is because naturally when somebody hits you, your head turns and then naturally they backhand you. Because in the ancient world, and still in many cultures in the world, they did not use toilet paper. So they would wipe their ass with their left hand. You would eat with your right hand and you would wipe with your left hand. So you would never hit someone with your left hand. It was unsanitary. People weren't using their left hand. So presumably somebody would slap you with their right hand and your head would turn by the impact. And then naturally they would backhand you because your head was in the proper direction to be backhanded. And so my friend was explaining to me that this lesson of Jesus was not about just nonviolence. It was about using nonviolence, but also standing up for yourself, not allowing yourself to be backhanded. It wasn't a literal lesson about not letting yourself being backhanded. It was an allegory for not engaging in violence, not retaliating in violence, but also placing yourself with your head high, placing yourself with self respect to not be putting yourself in a position to be backhanded because being backhanded was like the ultimate fuck you. It was more disrespectful to backhand someone than to hit them with the front of their hand, right? It's an allegory, you fucking dumb bitch. Anyway, I get very passionate talking about the Bible. I sometimes find myself very frustrated that there seems to be so many people who claim to be adamant believers and don't really do any research or know what the fuck the scriptures are saying. Hello. I also want to mention that the Bible specifically really talks a lot about nonviolence and respect for others. And I think that is a really important lesson that we can all be reminded and remember. Thank you so much for listening in on the podcast. I'm so passionate. I'm so hyped up. I appreciate you so much for listening. Please check out my merch site. It really helps. I'm a small creator. If you want to like or subscribe, if you want to join my Patreon, everything helps. I do this for the passion of the game. My dream is to turn this into my full-time job. That's what I'm putting out into the universe. I'm just a guy who likes to research things, but it means the world to me that you listen. I appreciate you. We need more kind human beings on planet Earth who care and want to have fun. And that's you. I know it's you. If you listen to the end, that's you. I hope you have the most beautiful day. I hope you have the most beautiful week. I hope that you are taking such good care of yourself. You deserve it. And I'll catch you next time.